So I suspect that we can start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to be with us in this. I think that this is the last talk regarding teaching mathematics of this season. We would like to continue next year, of course, with your help and with your contribution. I would like to thank our today's speaker, Dr. Alon Pinto, who is a senior scientist in Weizmann Institute of Technology, Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. I'm going to speak a little bit about the profile of our today's speaker. He has a PhD in mathematics by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. His research interests include the transition from studying mathematics at school to studying mathematics at university, the transition between studying mathematics at university and teaching mathematics at schools. Let me also accept people. The transition between doing mathematics inside class and doing mathematics outside of class. There is a common parameter here. If I can remember, my poor mathematics, the transition. So this is the common parameter in everything that Alon Pinto is doing, and I think it's very important, and it's a very current challenge that we are facing, all of us working in the university, depending of a department, regarding this transition and how we can handle these students in the best way, and also ourselves. So today's talk is entitled "The Secondary Tertiary Transition in Mathematics Education, Old and New Perspectives." I hope that all of us, we are going to make this transition after today's talk. Alon, thank you very much, Daraba, for this contribution to our community, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kostas, for also for initiating this wonderful series of talks and for inviting me. Let me share my presentation. Is this okay? Do you see the slides? Well, I'm not seeing you on you. I don't know if you nodded. Yes, all right. Thank you. So I changed a little bit my title. I changed it to lesson learned on improving the situation with respect to the secondary tertiary transition, because what I want to do is give an overview. It's an overview of the research literature and also overview on what, to our knowledge, has been going on in the field and the relationship between the two, how research can inform attempts to improve situation and how attempts to improve situation can enrich and guide research in this area. So before starting to talk about literature, maybe I should say something about what is this secondary tertiary transition that I'm talking about and why do we need to talk about it. So first of all, I will use the abbreviation STT for the secondary tertiary transition. This is the only abbreviation I'm asking you to remember in this talk. And tertiary means after secondary, so post-secondary. So this is the transition from secondary to post-secondary education. And if we look at the Mathematics Education Encyclopedia, we see the following definition. The transition from secondary to tertiary education is the process experienced by students leaving secondary school and entering different kinds of post-secondary institutions, universities, engineering schools, etc. So this is kind of a very dry and minimal description. If we look at something more recent, we see again a process, but this is a process of change, and it involves discontinuities and often crises. And most of the literature about transition emphasizes this idea of a process, and there's a lot of discussion about when it starts. I mean, it's naturally it intersects with secondary education and with tertiary education, but does it start? Does the transition start at the secondary education? Does it start between secondary and tertiary? Does it end at the first semester or the first year of tertiary studies? There's a lot of thinking about what this process entails and when it starts and when it ends. But one thing that is sure is that it is a very influential experience for students and also for mathematics professors. that it involves a lot of discontinuities, in many different kinds of discontinuities, and it's often experienced as a crisis by students, and I should add also by those who teach mathematics. Now, everything I said here, or everything that is written, so far the word mathematics didn't come up. So you can say that this kind of transition occurs in every discipline, and this is true. But there seems to be something specific about the mathematics. And if we, and this is example, for example, is represented by this quote by Anna Sfard, who describes how in the eyes of university newcomer, everything, the organization of the place, the form of interaction and the division of labor between those who learn and those who teach must seem new and different. But the thing that probably boggles the student mind more than anything else is the fact that she simply cannot recognize the mathematics. So when moving from secondary to tertiary, the mathematics changes, and it changes substantially to the extent that it simply looks like a completely different discipline. And this is a universal phenomenon. It doesn't depend on the secondary curriculum. When I'm not familiar of a place where the transition does not exist. So even though educational, secondary education and tertiary education are very different in different countries, the transition seems to always exist and until very significant discontinuities with respect to the mathematics. So why do we need to talk about STT, the secondary tertiary transition? Well, it has been linked repeatedly with low enrollment numbers in tertiary STEM programs, with alarmingly high failure and dropout rates in STEM. For example, there are studies that show that engineer students, the main reason that they cite for leaving STEM degrees, to drop out from STEM degrees, is mathematics courses, and there are difficulties in adapting to the new requirements of mathematics courses. There's a substantial emotional stress for students during the transition, and all these pose considerable social and economical implications. For example, there are studies that show that students from historically marginalized groups suffer most from this transition, meaning that it blocks certain kinds of groups of populations, of sections from population from entering STEM programs. Right, so another reason to talk about the secondary tertiary transition that it's been receiving keen research attention for more than 3 decades. Just to give two recent examples, there's the open access book, Transitions in Mathematics Education from 2016, and a very recent special issue on transition, how transition is experienced across the educational context and in different countries, which was released only last month. So there are numerous studies on transition from the last 3 decades. And another reason is that there are many indications of substantial and constantly increasing efforts in the field to address and improve STT. So there's a lot of research and there's a lot of efforts in the field in relation to STT. And what I want to do in this talk is talk about the relationship between the two. As I said, how can research guide efforts to improve STT, and how can these efforts highlight research trajectories, new research trajectories on the transition. So the plan for this talk, first I'm going to give a review about different approaches on what is the nature of the secondary tertiary transition and on improving it. Then I'm going to discuss and provide results from an international survey on professors' views of current efforts in the field to improve the transition. And finally, I'm going to discuss a few ideas, trajectories for moving forward and how research can help with improving the situation. So starting with different approaches and different perspectives in relations to transition and improving it, I'm going to present 4 idealized approaches for improving the transition. These approaches are derived from the literature. So looking at the literature over the last 3 decades, the research literature, you can see 4 different kinds of approaches for how the situation with respect to the transition can be improved. So looking at the different perspectives on the nature of STT across the years, early research mostly aimed to understand epistemic differences and cognitive processes related to students' difficulties in their initial encounters with tertiary mathematics. So the focus was on the individual. Research looked at individual students, at their difficulties, and tried to explain those difficulties in terms of the difference between how mathematics is done at school and at the university level, and on the cognitive processes needed to make the shift, the transition to doing mathematics the way it's done at the university level. Often these students' difficulties were painted as stemming from deficiencies in secondary mathematics education, and notably, secondary mathematics education is often portrayed in this literature not only as falling short in terms of what mathematics students learn, but also, and often more so, in terms of how students learn mathematics and what kind of understandings they develop. So it's not so much about students don't learn enough mathematics at the secondary level, it's that they don't learn mathematics properly, or they don't understand the mathematics they are being taught at the secondary level. And to give you a representative quote from the literature, secondary school students often succeed in mathematics at the secondary level by relying on their ability to perform algorithms, and in spite of a lack of a real understanding of the mathematical concepts with which they are working, they may then experience substantial difficulties when moving to the tertiary level in being able to participate by themselves in the process of the mathematical thinking, and not merely learn to reproduce mathematical information. So you may wonder when was this quote, when did it appear? It could have appeared yesterday in a conversation with a colleague, but it appeared 25 years ago, but it still seems to be relevant for education today. Now, when you look at the literature, mostly from 3 decades ago and 2 decades ago, the most common approaches for improving STT, the transition, are aligned with this kind of perspective on the transition, are to bring secondary mathematics curricula closer to the discipline, to propose bridging courses that help students close the gap between the secondary and tertiary levels, or to unlearn school mathematics and relearn the school mathematics curriculum. What is common for all these approaches is that they're trying to fix the problem at the beginning. So when students enter university, you have to do something to bring students to a place where they can start the studies. This is because there's a sort of a deficit in their preparation. And you can think about it as, if you think about discontinuity between secondary and tertiary, you can think about it as a jump discontinuity. School doesn't bring students to the right place. So and you need to help students make the jump, make the leap towards where they are supposed to be or need to be in order to start the tertiary studies. Now, over the last decades, there's a different approach that is increasingly becoming more dominating. And this is about viewing the transition as an acculturation process, one that cannot be fully addressed within short-term measures such as bridging courses. So to give you an example of what this enculturation entails, we can look at examples from the influential work of Tommy Dreyfus from 1999, Why Johnny Can't Prove. And Tommy collected examples from students' proofs. And what he observed is that often these proofs were rejected by professors, but not necessarily because students didn't understand the specific topics or the specific context, but more because students didn't understand what it means to prove, or didn't understand how a proof should look like and should be communicated. For example, in the first example, we see students are asked to determine whether whether it's true or false that a subset of a linearly independent set is also linearly independent, and the student answers true because taking down a vector does not help linear independence. And what Dreyfus observes is that this answer kind of mimics the way professors talk about linear independence in class. But when it needs to be translated to a proof, there needs to be some sort of a translation that is missing here. And so students doesn't know how to write a proof and doesn't know how a proof should look like. To give you another example from another study, this one looked at students struggling to understand what her proof should look like. And the reason is that students had to work with two very different kinds of proofs. So this is a proof as it appears in the textbook, and this is how the same proof appears on the board in the lecture. And when students were asked to produce a similar proof, a proof of a similar statement in their home assignment, they had to figure out what their proofs should look like, more like the textbook proof or more like what the professor did on the board. And in this case, the student did something in the middle, trying to take informal ideas that were presented in the lecture, but making them look more formal, communicated more formally. And the feedback of the professor was just to cross this whole section saying, well, this is redundant. You don't need to include this in the proof. This is just an informal explanation about where the idea of the proof comes from. So we see there is a lot of struggling about understanding what should be included in a proof or not, and feedbacks from the professors that are not about whether something is correct or not, but about a normative stance, about the norms of what should be included in a proof or not. So in a line with this perspective that making the transition is learning a new language that needs constant feedback and it entails constant mistakes from students, not because of misunderstanding of the content, but of misunderstanding of communication. Suggestions for improving STT emphasize prolonged communication and extensive interaction between professors and students. And such suggestions can be seen as enculturation-oriented. And examples in the field include small group tutoring, mentoring arrangement, or mathematical support centers, where there's a lot of opportunities for professors to hear the voice of the students, and a lot of opportunities for the students to hear to receive feedback from representative of the disciplines, such as professors. Right. Very quickly, two more approaches for improving STT that you can see in the literature. One is a diversity-oriented approach, and this comes from a diversification in the literature of the term of secondary tertiary transition, in the sense of giving growing attention to how this transition may mean different things in different educational systems, in different institutions, in different STEM programs, etc. So someone who's an engineer student and someone who is a future mathematician may experience the same course very differently. And of course, there are differences between different countries, and there could be differences between colleges and universities, etc. And there's also in the same country, in the same institution, in the same program, in the same course, different students may experience the transition very differently depending on their background. And this is particularly important if we try to make tertiary mathematics or STEM, more generally STEM programs more accessible for historically marginalized groups. So approaches for improving the transition that seek to address these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we see a growing number of such efforts in the fields in recent years, can be seen as diversity-oriented. Finally, a fourth and last approach is based on a recognition that the transition occurs between two different institutions and also between two different communities. So there are calls from researchers in recent years for improving the transition through collaboration between communities of teachers and professionals across the transition divides, meaning secondary math teachers, mathematicians, maybe engineers or people teaching engineering courses at the tertiary level, physics or science, etc. So the idea is that the expertise and knowledge needed to support students in the transition does not reside in just one community. Mathematicians cannot necessarily help students make the transition if they don't understand where the students are coming from, or don't understand well enough where the students are going to, what are they going to do with mathematics in case where their students are going to become engineers or scientists. So such collaborations are considered essential for overcoming issues of coherence in mathematics as a discipline, which where the rules change across educational levels and professional contexts, and efforts for improving STT that are based on forming cross-community partnerships can be seen as a cross-community oriented efforts. Right, so this was a brief review of four idealized approaches for improving the transition. And I should say, not in reality, no one approach or no one measure for improving STT falls exactly within one of these four approaches. In this sense, they are idealized. And you can test and examine each case and say, well, how is efforts to improve transition in this university aligned with those four idealistic approach, which is what I'm going to do next. So now I'm moving to examining the field and how professors currently view efforts to improve STT in their institutions. So so there are not many studies that investigated professors' perspectives on STT. Most of the research is focused on students' difficulties or the differences between different kinds of mathematics. One notable exception is a survey from 2015 that provide an extended account of the perspective of 79 tertiary mathematics professors from 21 countries. And mainly, the survey addresses students' difficulties in various mathematical areas, and it shows that a lot of the difficulties are universal. So they're not specific to specific countries, but rather students in different countries have similar difficulties in a given mathematical area. But another thing the survey notes is that most professors could specify various academic support measures, and at least one in their department, for supporting students during STT, which shows that there are a lot of efforts in the field to improve the situation. Now, the survey was concluded with the following observation. Overall, the survey confirmed that students do have some difficulties in transition, and these are occasionally related to a deficit in student preparation or mathematical knowledge. However, there are also a number of areas that universities could address to assist students, such as adjusting the content of first-year courses and initiating a course on proving and proof where this course doesn't exist already, and constructing appropriate bridging courses. So from this quote, one may assume that by and large, the responses were aligned with a jump discontinuity approach, because we see that there's there's a discussion about the deficit in student preparation, and there are bridging courses, and there's a course of proving. So a lot of emphasis on correcting the situation at the beginning of tertiary education. But interestingly, this represents only 1/3 of the responses, and the report on the survey does not specify other perspectives of the other 2/3 of the professors that participated in the survey. So there seems to be a lot of local initiatives for improving STT in the field, but we know very little about it. And we know very little about the perspectives of professors on this transition, on these initiatives, and on their effectiveness and impact. And one may, while one may assume that most of the perspectives contain deficit narratives on secondary mathematics education and on students and are aligned with jump-oriented approaches, there are indications from the 2015 survey that the field may in fact be more diverse. And this is why the Education Mathematics Committee of the European Mathematics Society commissioned a new survey in 2019 to fill this gap. And I'm now going to report about this survey and about its results. So the design of this survey was guided by improvement science literature and was focused on professors' profound knowledge for improving transition, which, without getting too much into the theory, means knowledge of when and how to employ various resources for improvement in a specific context. So we wanted to understand more about the experience that professors have accumulated over the years from trying to improve the situation, rather than looking at the knowledge of the transition itself. We already know quite a lot about what are students' difficulties, but we wanted to know more about how to cope with these difficulties and what kind of experience has been accumulated in the field. So the survey had 3 parts that were aligned with 3 overarching questions. The first one was looking at the past, and it was about what are professors looking to improve with respect to STT, looking at developments over the last decade. The second one was how the professor determined whether there's an improvement while assessing current measures in their departments. And finally, with an eye towards the future, what changes do professors propose for making an improvement with respect to the transition? So data was collected through an online anonymous questionnaire. We got 310 responses from 30 countries. And while this may sound like a lot, I should say that most of the responses were centered in Europe, United States, and Canada and Australia. So this was by no means representative of all educational systems. And also, because the questionnaire was anonymous, we didn't know to what extent different institutions were represented. So we cannot say anything about what's the situation in different countries or in different institutions. This is more about diversities of perspectives than about how perspectives change in different contexts. Overall, we analyzed 1,240 responses to 4 closed questions and 972 responses to 6 open questions. Our analysis was guided by the 4 idealized approaches for improving STT that I discussed earlier. So we wanted to see whether, while the research literature is shifting, we wanted to see whether and to what extent these shifts are evident in the field. And we also look for deficit narratives, because we consider this a very influential aspect of STT, and could hinder attempts to improve the situation. And deficit narratives are defined as socially circulated and reified stories that focus on students' academic and intellectual shortcomings and attribute them to deficiencies located in the students, their values, their families, or their cultures. Right. So, majority of respondents, so I'm not giving you, I don't want to bomb you with numbers. So obviously not all the respondents answered all the questions, but I'm not gonna give you the precise numbers of responses for each question. I'm giving you a sense of the results, and you can look at the paper and see the precise numbers. So the majority, about 77% of respondents attested that concerns with respect to transition have aggravated over the last 10 years. So in spite of all research and in spite of all efforts to improve situation, the perspective of professors, most of professors, is that situation is getting worse. Almost all explanations about this aggravation address students' preparedness, readiness, and maturity. One thing about this is that I do want to say that regardless of the country and of the educational systems and of the reforms in the secondary education in different countries, almost all explanations said that situation with respect to the preparedness of secondary students is that it's getting worse, which is an interesting finding, I think. Almost all explanations were jump-oriented, which means that from the respondent perspectives, either student preparedness or secondary mathematics education did not meet expectations. And about 2/3 contained deficit narratives about secondary education or secondary education teachers or secondary education students. Responses often cited more than one deficiency in students. For example, weak mathematical foundations, poor algebraic skills, poor reasoning, unwilling to engage with rigorous mathematics, tendency to give up, lack of interest or motivation, poor working attitudes, dependency, etc. And a few, 10% of responses were identified as diversity-oriented, meaning looking at the past decade with an eye on experiences, diverse experience of different students. And there was almost no enculturation-oriented or cross-community-oriented responses, which kind of highlight the difference between where the research literature is and where our practitioners. Give you a few examples of quotes from the survey about STT, and how it's changed over the last decade. So I think secondary education mathematics has become more focused on applications and modeling and less focused on why questions. This was coded as jump-oriented. The mathematical level of high school students and their autonomy to find resources in order to solve mathematical problems has decreased in the last years. Consequently, a starting point is a handicap for the next steps in university. So this is both jump-oriented, but also deficit. It means there's a problem at the beginning, and this is because the word handicap is very powerful here. There's the starting point that provided by secondary education is a handicap for students. And to give you an example of something that looks a bit different, then transition hasn't changed in a mathematical way that I know of. Changes have had more to do with attracting certain groups of students, of people, i.e. encouraging women to pursue studies in mathematics. So this was not about changes in mathematics in the preparedness of students, but rather about in the groups that are joining university. So when asked to reflect about how effective are the current academic measures in their departments for supporting students during STT, we provided a few examples and invited professors also to list other kind of measures. So we focused on bridging courses, pedagogical training of professors, resources, teaching resources, resources for lecturers, learning resources for students, and tutoring or mentoring. And we asked whether these measures were whether the professors were aware that these measures were employed in their departments. whether they were effective or not effective, and we gave them, this was a closed question, and we were mostly interested in those measures that were indicated as highly effective or ineffective. And these are the results. And I want to draw your attention to that resources for students are the most common, while bridging courses and tutoring and mentoring are also quite common. But, and while resources for, oops, I don't know what this, sorry. Anyway, resources for lecturers or pedagogical training for lecturers, whatever is supposed to help teaching, is far less common. In terms of things that were considered highly effective or ineffective, we see that mentoring and tutoring were considered the most effective measures for improving STT, while pedagogical training of professors was considered by far the least effective measure. And with respect to the other measures, there was a sort of it's almost equal whether they're considered highly effective or ineffective, which shows the diversity, diverse perspectives in the field. A few general observations. So respondents were generally dissatisfied with jump-oriented measures and appreciated more acculturation-oriented measures, which is different from responses to the first part of the survey, which was much more oriented toward jump-oriented approaches. There's initial evidence of a link between perspectives on the nature of STT and criteria used to determine the effectiveness of measures. So if respondents were considered deficit of students coming from secondary, they were also more appreciative of bridging courses. Whereas if professors were less considering deficit, they were more appreciative of tutoring and mentoring arrangement. Interestingly, there were no references to cross-community oriented approach to collaboration between teachers and mathematicians or professors. And there were also no references to any influence of experience accumulated outside of the institution or to mathematics education research. So all the explanations and descriptions related to measures currently employed at departments were local. They did not, there was no networking of knowledge, no collaboration between different institutions, different universities, etc. As far as you can see from the survey. Interestingly, almost all respondents were aware of at least one academic support measure in their institution, and about 80% of respondents were aware of at least two measures, which shows that there's really a lot of activity in the field, a lot of attempts to at least try to do something to improve the situation. And respondents had an opinion about these measures. So while they were given an option to say that they have no opinion, in 90% of the cases, they did not use it and considered something as effective or not effective. And when they were explaining the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of measures, they were giving all sorts of criteria, using all sorts of criteria. One kind of criteria was about whether enough students are making use of the measures, or if students are showing up, and whether the students that are making use of the measures are the one most needing support. And this seems like a repeating problem, that whatever a mathematics department offers, the students making use of the resources are not the one who needs the support, according to the professors. And Another kind of measures that were used, well, indirect, whether dropout or failure has improved and whether students exhibit less difficulties, but these were mostly, well, being indirect, I should add that it's questionable, they're questionable as criteria for effectiveness because there could be many factors that influence dropout and failure. For example, who is attending the bridging course or tutoring. So coming to the last part of the survey, we asked how can the situation be improved? And we also invited participants to offer, to propose a realistic project for improving the situation. The respondents strongly, even very strongly, leaned towards school-level reforms. So fixing things at school and not at the university. But still, about half of the respondents also indicated a need for some sort of reform at the tertiary level. At the tertiary level, the most common kind of reform that was that was proposed was a lecturer professional development. And I'm reminding you that perspectives on current measures for professional development of lecturers are viewed very poorly. So it's something that is not very common. When it takes place, it's viewed as something that is ineffective. Yet a lot of professors seem to be asking for something that in this area that would be effective. When asked who are in the best position, who are the stakeholders that are in best position to make a substantial positive impact, the respondents identified mathematics professors and school teachers, those in the best position, which is interesting because there were no collaboration between these two communities in the survey. And sadly, tertiary students and mathematics education researchers were considered the least positioned to make a substantial positive impact. Now, when in terms of the realistic project that were proposed, 93 projects were proposed, 70 of which could be mapped to an idealistic approach. Now, the proposed project represented all idealistic approach. So you could find, for each approach, you can find several projects that are more or less aligned with it, which is interesting because we didn't see that in other parts of the survey, but no project was mapped to more than one approach. So each project was either do something at the beginning or do something which is long-term or do something that attends to the diversity or do some sort of collaboration with teachers, but no project was mapped to more than one of these 4 approaches. Most of the projects were either restricted to school level or restricted to the tertiary level, but in very few, about 20%, included both educational level and some sort of cross-community collaboration. I'm saying few, but actually maybe 20% is not so little. So maybe there's some sort of encouragement from my perspective that 20% of the project did look for some sort of cross-community collaboration. To give you some examples of different projects that were aligned with different approaches. So a preparation course just before the start of university studies, led by university staff, which is well aware of the current knowledge of students and of the skills that will be required in the university, can be very helpful for this. So this is a bridging effort, so a jump discontinuity, do something at the beginning. Another proposal was some taste of university math courses. So academic professors could try to give incoming students an idea of university math, not some kind of popular math talk, but more formal formal reasoning ideas from foundations. We already sent students some information on what they'll be doing, but this doesn't seem to have impact. Face-to-face experience might. So this is more about helping students with their enculturation by explaining them through face-to-face interaction about the transition they are supposed to, about the transition they are entering. Another, another proposal was to that University Mathematics Department should interview many incoming STEM students to try and understand why they are pursuing their math-intensive STEM degrees and what excited them about these degrees. Then the departments can better tailor our academic approach to meet those students' needs. So this focuses on the fact that different students may have different things that excite them and may have different needs, and that current courses are not aligned with the diverse needs of students. And so there's need to change, make some sort of a reform in terms of courses provided by the institution. And finally, the fourth proposition was to a school-founded regional professional development workshop for school teachers and university faculty, including a panel of current college students. This way, all these people can meet in person and think about issues together, as well as vertical alignment issues. The panel of students would help to elaborate on their experiences. So this is an idea about how to improve things through communication between people who have different perspective on STT, school teachers, university faculty, possibly from different programs, and perspective of students as well. Two final observations about the survey. So I mentioned it already, but there were three parts in the survey, one with an eye to the past, one with an eye to the present, and one with an eye to the future. And for some reason, which I cannot explain, responses in relation to the past decade were mostly aligned with jump-oriented approaches. Responses in relation to the effectiveness of current measures were more aligned with an enculturation-oriented approach, and proposals for future projects included much larger portion of diversity and cross-community oriented approach. This is an interesting phenomena. If someone has an explanation, I would be happy to hear. And another observation is that while professors seem to agree on students' difficulties in relation to the transition in different mathematics areas, perspectives about improving the situation seem much more diverse and much more fragmented. In particular, the notion of improvement seems to be interpreted by different professors in many different ways. A few final remarks on the future, on moving forward and how research can help. So, as I said, many of the current approaches for improving STT and many of the proposals for projects that could improve the situation focus on just one approach, but is one approach enough? Now, one possible explanation about why this is the case, it seems that different approaches are aligned with different perspectives on the nature of the transition. So people who have one perspective, one kind of perspective on the nature would choose one kind of approach, but perhaps different approaches could be integrated to provide more comprehensive academic support measures. And to check whether this is the case, research can help by formulating clearer criteria for improvement and by investigating the effectiveness of different combination of approaches. Second, the second comment is that it appears that many professors are involved or would like to be involved in effort to improve the situation, the transition, yet it seems also that exchange of ideas and dissemination of knowledge across institutions is limited. Of course, local context matters. Solution in one university in one country may not apply to a different university and to a different country, but professors may still learn from and with one another. And research may help this kind of networking by delineating what aspects of the transition are local and what aspects are more universal, and by helping develop a shared and explicit discourse on the transition and on improving it, because as the surveys show, currently there are many different discourses, and a lot of the explanation, a lot of the views and assumptions about the transition are not explicit. And finally, by definition, the transition involves both the secondary educational level and the tertiary educational level. Arguably, the knowledge, expertise, and resources needed to improve situation with respect to the transition do not reside on either side of STT, not at the school level and not at the university level. At least this is my argument. Yet communication across these two levels seems to be very limited, and efforts for improving STT are generally restricted to one level, either a reform at the secondary level or something at the tertiary level. And researchers can help creating more cross-community collaboration by acting as brokers, helping those two communities, which often do not communicate well with one another, help this communication, and by suggesting how they can collaborate together. And my concluding remarks is that by all evidence, there are great efforts that are invested over the years and are still currently invested to improve the transition. There's a body of research, there's a body of research that is growing rapidly. There's indications that mathematics departments and professors consider themselves more accountable than ever to student learning and are investing great efforts to improve the situation. I would add that after COVID, I think mathematics departments are arguably more open to new pedagogies. While it's not clear whether the situation is improving with respect to STT, and it's not even clear what improvement means, there seems to be a good potential for a positive change. And I'm inviting us, all stakeholders in mathematics education, to work together to realize this potential. Thank you. All right, so I'll stop sharing, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much, Alon. A wonderful presentation, I would say, very clear. I have some questions, but I will provide the floor first to the audience to ask their questions to the speaker. Yes, Mirella, the floor is yours.
Hi, Mirella.
Hi, Alon. So nice to see you again. And last time when we met, we were speaking a little bit about this topic, and you know I'm interested very much in this. And this survey is wonderful, and the effort you put to bring all this perspective is very nice. So I'm happy for it. I just want to ask you if when you looked on all these surveys, if you look also to the terminology double discontinuity, because a huge part of, or not a huge, but a big amount of people connected secondary, tertiary transition to the first double discontinuity of Klein, which even takes us even longer in time than 1998 to 1916. Saying the same thing. So we are long in time with the same problem. And we tried in many years to do different things. Another comment I have that maybe is not included in your survey is that there are some works connected with beyond pure cognitive aspects. For example, I have just published a paper about some survey we had in Sweden, in Germany, and Turkey, which was about the dimension like personal, social, organizational. There are some other types of issues that also participate to this, of course, content-related transition that we always have and we probably always will have. So this is another thing that I wanted to discuss with you. And the third is that probably is not good enough research in the fact that we have a lot in most of European countries, probably even in other parts of the world, a lot of reforms in the a pre-university level that transform completely the school. And the university is not really connected to those changes. So that's why I understand that the teacher said that in the last 10 years, it's even worse because it happened a lot in schools. And we at university keep the level, and the level in schools, because of these reforms, went down in most of European countries, and we still keep the same level. So I think that those preparatory courses are really needed. So what you call as the jump, the bridges courses, we really need, because school goes more and more down in the level of mathematics, and we keep the level at university, most of us. And also last comment, because you put the question and you wonder why you have this in the past, in the present, and in the future. I think that the past is because this is what we did. So we, of course, if you ask me, I will also relate and answer to you the same, because I think what I already did. And the present, probably, I'm not sure, but the future is that it's something we didn't really try. We think probably will work. So we don't know that will work, these cross communities. We try now, we plan to try. So I think that we put it in the future because we believe can work, but we don't know yet. So we will see in 10 years if such cross collaboration will really work, probably, but we don't know. So these were my ideas. I'm done.
So I will try to answer all 4 comments/questions. I hope I remember them. Let me start with start backwards because I remember the 4th the best. So I agree with you that this is a valid interpretation of different perspectives, but of participants. But what was interesting to me, it was that it was a perspective on the nature of the transition. So the perspective on the nature of the transition of the same person changes with while looking at what happened, not personally, but what happened in the institution, what is currently going on, and how things may change. And it's interesting that perspectives change according to the question. This was what was interesting to me. It's not what I've been done and what I want to do, but rather what is the nature of the transition when I look at how things change, and what is the nature of the transition when I'm proposing something for the future. About the differences, the different reforms at the secondary level, and how they may impact the situation and the perspectives on the situation. First of all, I'm not against jump oriented approaches. As I said, I think a mixture, a combination of different approaches may be something good. I found it interesting that while there are reforms in almost every country in the last decade, everyone says that it's for the worse. And not just in Europe, and not just in Eastern Europe or Western Europe, but also in the United States and Australia, and those who responded from Africa or South America or Asia. Everyone says that things are changing for the worst. I'm finding it peculiar, and almost always in the same sense. So either everyone is, all the world is very coordinated about making things worse, or maybe there's another explanation. But I find this interesting. And as for whether I considered Klein's double discontinuity, absolutely. I'm mostly working with teachers making the transition to university and back to school. In this survey, we didn't make the distinction, and there was not enough responses that clarified whether there were teachers, whether the students were teachers, or whether they were future mathematicians, or whether they were future scientists. So we couldn't make this kind of distinction. But we're in the Education Mathematics Committee of the European Mathematics Society, we're considering a new survey about the double discontinuity in different European countries, about mathematicians' involvement in these programs, and about their experiences in programs for secondary mathematics teachers.
I think there are some recent studies in several countries that call the secondary tertiary transition as the first double discontinuity. So if you search for that, you go to those studies. Not the second one, that one is all about teachers, but the first one is about usual pupils.
Yeah, absolutely. The first discontinuity is aligned with the secondary tertiary transition, different terms used for the same phenomenon. And finally, you mentioned a few dimensions that I didn't discuss in relation to the transition. Absolutely. There are many additional dimensions. I was not exclusive. I didn't talk about everything. And I'm interested.
You mentioned them, but it was in, you have them in the teachers or in your survey when the professors answered, they mentioned those dimensions. They mentioned. Okay. So you have them in some way.
Thank you for this comment, and I will look for you the paper that you mentioned about the comparison between 3 countries. Yes. Nissim.
First of all, thank you very much. It was really interesting. I just have one comment that from the data that you gathered, it seems that we are all making a lot of effort in putting technology into studies, but what seems to be more effective, what 70% is tutoring, which is face-to-face and human interaction. So I found it very, very interesting.
And there are more indication, not just from the survey, but also from other studies, that these are very effective measures. I would also add that they are very expensive in terms of resources, because working with small groups, often the problem of implementing these efforts is that you need to find good people that can facilitate small groups, and a lot of them. And it's a very interesting question of how to do it. I can say that one thing that I'm trying to initiate is having secondary mathematics teachers collaborate with third-year students in facilitating such meetings, thinking that maybe the teachers can bring their own expertise in accessing students with diverse backgrounds. The third-year students can bring their mathematical understanding. So you have teaching experience, you have mathematical knowledge, and together maybe you can facilitate this kind of small group activities. So, but there's a shortage of resources. So this is something that needs to be. We need a solution for this.
About tutoring, I've seen recently, I've been in a conference in Trondheim in Norway, and I've seen a very nice result from Norway where they used students, good students, for a big tutoring program. So I also believe that we need more content, teacher or good students to work with beginners.
Right. But then we need to be careful about not to place too much weight on those who have the least teaching experience. So taking third-year students or teaching assistants who are doing their masters or something like that, we need to acknowledge that they still don't have teaching experience. And we don't need to put all the weight of the transition on their shoulders. So we need to figure out something that use them as a resource, but in a responsible and effective way.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I have some, but first of all, I would like to welcome Eva, who is back well. Thank you, Eva, for being with us. It's nice to see you back.
You're muted, Eva.
Nice to see both Eva and Nissim. And Nissim, I hope to see you soon in Romania. And
nice to see you, Eva.
I definitely think we should speak more about this and maybe try to work together, because we have the same interest, all of us. So
yeah. You would like to
Eva, if you're talking to us, you're muted.
You are muted. We don't hear you.
No.
No.
Okay. So I just, it ended on my desk just yesterday, a very interesting book with a lot of chapters. All were focused to mathematics and engineering. So I will resend this book to you because it was recently publicized in May 23rd issue. And it will be very helpful for various sort of people with their experiences. If you like, I will resend to you through the email, which I have ETD listserv, and I was in the morning studying it. It seems to me very, very useful to have at least some of them. Okay?
Thank you, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Would appreciate it.
So we continue as in our approach of frequent testing and having feedback, and fortunately after some problems that there were no teachers to replace me, we managed to find people who are fully aware and will join us with these mini tests, checking, and we can analyze it. And so far, as I realized that when we had a comparison, foreign students and Czech students, that the students with whom these technologies I involved into the teaching methodologies were not used, the successfulness dropped to 50%, which is an alarming output. And I think that if we will force again these step by step and more what is getting to better frame of the application that will help students to practice and to get to the animations and these modern tools that we also incorporated in the MATLAB web server might be very helpful for them to better understand the problems. It's up to them. They have an access to that, and they can simply discover how different models work, and it may help them better understanding of the problems.
Thank you, Eva. So I think I would like a very fast question for non-mathematical departments, because during your presentation, Alon, you said like mathematical departments and mathematical departments. I mean, how much, these approaches do they change if we are talking about the transition to a non-mathematical departments like ours, that we are engineering or physics? So how much the approaches or I suspect that, the response of the students will be the same, like, regarding, the challenges. So regarding, I would like to give me, if it's possible, some examples about these bridging courses, but not in a mathematical departments. Do you have any examples? What kind of bridging courses, and when do they apply? Do they apply on top of the duties that they have during the semester, or you introduce, let's say, a summer semester that the students, they register in order to bridge not only mathematics, but physics, chemistry, and etc.?
Not really like that. You may answer. Who knows the answer? I may tell them after. Okay.
I'm open for all the answers. More the better.
So it is that at Czech Technical University, all the faculties have the math like a major subject, which is lectured 1 or 2 semesters, and then it might continue in some special subjects. And it is in various faculties the approach to get better students as the result of their learning math within the regular curricula and schedule and what they do. we realized that when we combine math with direct application to math software, whether they can visualize, they can calculate, they can practice immediately. It's through the math software, MATLAB or Mathematica. It depends on them because both of these are available, and it helped them to understand the details they are forced to investigate, to study, from the differential calculus and the introduction to it, then to the more advanced and more complex subject, which is integral calculus and introduction to differential calculus, differential equations. And it seems to us that when they have this small real life problems that are joined to them and they can use them freely, that it helps them to gain awareness of what it is behind, and it's full of math description that might be that they become losing their major idea. When they can see the visualization of these processes from the sequences beginning, they can be much more aware of what is the major topics that they have to be capable to find out or to prove. And it's like that.
Thank you. Thank you for
I just want to add to what Eva said. It's interesting that you asked this because I just came back from a conference in Bergen, and we had a week where we were talking about calculus courses for non-mathematicians. And we had
that. I mean, I missed that conference.
Yeah, so we had people from physics education and economy education and engineering education and chemistry and biology. And we invested a lot of time talking about how you can teach calculus in ways that are in ways that facilitate both make sense and relevant and support the use of calculus in future courses. And we had a lot of ideas. Obviously, implementation throughout calculus is important, but then it can be also challenging if you have students from physics, engineering, and chemistry in the same cohort, and they have different notations and they have different rules for using the calculus, and this was interesting. And so we had all sorts of ideas of how to do it. For example, you can have professors from different courses come and have visiting classes within the calculus to help explain, because often mathematicians don't have the knowledge about how calculus can be implemented in other disciplines, but have professors from other disciplines come and visit and give some talks throughout the course, and then have the calculus give these lessons back in the discipline courses to say, remember, we learned calculus in the previous semester, and now you learn this is how it connects. Now you can revisit the calculus ideas. And we talked about having teaching tutoring sessions for different disciplines. So a tutoring session for chemistry, a tutoring session for calculus, for physics, etc. But mostly we talked about developing a shared discourse. So understanding how things are different between the different disciplines, understanding how the same notation, we were wanting to use a big D someplace, and no, the economics say, no, D is for us something different, and it's very confusing. And whether you use X or T or even small things like that, it was very helpful to have people from the future disciplines of the students talk together about how to teach specific ideas, because they had a very insightful comments about doing things slightly different in ways that wouldn't create future barriers, future difficulties for students. So I'm not so much giving you an answer about whether this kind of bridging courses exist. In my university, there is a bridging course for science students. They learn what is called mathematics for future scientists. So it's just applications and no proofs. But I'm not sure this is enough. I think more along the lines of what I was saying, course that brings together different ways of using mathematics and talks about the differences. So making students more aware of these differences and making transition more conscious and deliberate, not something that every course the professors change the rules of the game without telling you, which I think is one of the most major problems in the transition.
I think what you said right now is the future. I've seen two nice examples. One in Trondheim, maybe you also seen it now in Bergen. I don't know if Ruda was there, a professor from Trondheim, but I've seen one very nice example from Barcelona last year, where in a department, where in engineering department, the mathematics course was not a mathematics course, was a course, a PBL course having several type of teachers inside, like engineers, physics, chemistry, whatever they needed for the project plus mathematics. So the whole PD course was together in a big course, which so when they learned the PDs, to solve also numerically and everything else, they had a project where they needed to use the physics, the chemistry parts, everything. So every little part was taught, and it was in the end a big course, applied course. So I think that's the future. I really liked the example from Barcelona. I've seen again one from Norway. I think we move through that direction, like in departments that Kostas has, well, more not mathematics department, but like physics, engineering.
Yeah. So
I think
interesting trajectory.
There are already courses functioning that way, and I think there are good results.
Excellent. Thank you for the answers. I think that now it's time to close this session. I would like to thank you, the speaker and the participants, for this nice discussion and also the presentation before the discussion started. I hope that we continue, this kind of series of lectures, next semester as well. Everything is uploaded to the YouTube channel. I will send you the link to the YouTube channel so to be able to check again and follow all the implemented lectures, later on. Probably it's very inspired for our teaching activities, but also for future other activities regarding institutions, but also your projects. So I think that we should close. Thank you, and see you soon.
Have a nice summer, all of you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas, for this series.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.